Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining. At CIQ, we're focused on powering the next generation of software infrastructure, leveraging the capabilities of cloud, hyperscale, and HPC. From research to the enterprise, our customers rely on us for the ultimate Rocky Linux, Warewulf, and Apptainer support escalation. We provide deep development capabilities and solutions, all delivered in the collaborative spirit of open source.
Hey, hey, thanks for being
Hey there,
here. How's it
Rose.
going?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
Wonderful. Yes, it is a beautiful day. Where I'm at, the sun is shining and all is okay. I haven't had
It
to leave my
it
house
is
yet.
it is about the opposite here. We've been having below zero temperatures this week, and it's supposed to be in like the 50s tomorrow, but
Oh,
or not tomorrow. Sorry, next week. But they're talking about some big dump of snow on us tomorrow to kind of usher out the cold weather. So we'll see what happens.
that's really interesting. Living in California, I mean, I've traveled places, but not when it was crazy like that. That seems crazy to me. How do you breathe in weather like that? Do you just not ever go outside? Like, I imagine that like your lungs have a rough time. Is that accurate?
You just get used to it, I guess.
You get used to it. Okay, you figure it out, right? You just kinda, "Okay, run." Oh, man, that's awesome. Well, thank you everybody for being here. If you have, any questions, comments, concerns as we go through, today's presentation, please leave them in the comments. We definitely want to, answer them, directly as possible because we have a pretty exciting topic that we're gonna be talking about today. We have a new release in Werewolf.
It's not quite out yet, but we're within a week, I think. It should be out. There've been a couple release candidates, and we've got plenty of stuff that people can see now. They could go install and use. There are some brave souls that have been doing that already and providing us valuable feedback, but it's getting real close.
Okay, wonderful. Well, maybe we'll just do a little introduction real quick, just in case there's anyone new to us. My name is Rose Stein. I work at CIQ in the sales department, so happy to answer any questions and make sure that you get what you need. And Jonathan Anderson, who are you?
Yeah. Hi, my name's Jonathan Anderson, and I am an engineer with the performance computing team here at CIQ. So my background's in like academic and research high performance computing, but here I work on our Fuzzball product as well as Werewolf and the Werewolf community.
Okay, so maybe you want to do like a little overview of Werewolf, and sometimes it's good to just kind of highlight the difference between what it means to work at a company that supports an open source project and what it means to kind of be involved in the open source project. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that too.
Yeah, for sure. So, Werewolf is a cluster management and provisioning system. So, it lets you kind of deploy one server with one source of truth that knows everything about your cluster. And then you put other compute resources, or it doesn't have to be compute, but commonly compute resources on your cluster or on a network, turn them on, they check in with the server, get the operating system and the configuration that they should have, and turn on statelessly, and go from kind of a single server to a many hundred or thousand node cluster in minutes, and not have to worry a big deal about configuration drift, things changing on one node and not being propagated to other nodes. Everything is just kind of a reboot away from just being clean and pristine the way you want it to be. Ends up being a pretty good situation for most people. Um, in terms of the company versus the community side of things, so Werewolf is an open source project. We sell support and services for it here at CIQ, and we do a little bit around the edges of providing like custom node images and things like that for our customers, and developing custom overlays for them. But a lot of the development is done in the open with the community. And so we're big players in that, CIQ. And so my participation in that community is a sponsored effort of CIQ. But we have collaborators from Intel and OpenHPC and SUSE, and a few other from like the user community that are either users of the system or users of Werewolf and have a vested interest in its success, or are selling support services for it themselves, which is, great, all in the community.
It is great, and so thank you to everyone who is involved in the community. I mean, any open source project that is widely used needs people behind the scenes, kind of managing and taking care of things. Did we want to talk a little bit about the channel, the YouTube channel that you just
Yeah,
created?
so I wanted to put this out there. So we just recently, just this last, so we have twice monthly steering committee meetings for the people that are kind of formally in the organizing body for the Werewolf project, and we've been doing those meetings for quite a while, but we just recently started putting those online. So I was going to show this here, one of the many things that we'll talk about. Here it
So
is.
it's kind of unique, though. I personally, I have not seen any other open source project, and maybe I'm just ignorant to, the variety of them out there. But you're recording the steering committee meeting and then posting it here on the YouTube.
Yeah, that's right. So we have this one here. We'll have one playlist here that's for the meetings themselves, and then mostly just to initialize it, I kind of did a trawl all through YouTube looking for people that had done things about Werewolf, and a lot of that is, of course, all right, thanks. Playing a video. A lot of that is, of course, us, but a fair bit of it is I found other people that are doing that have kind of done their own deployments and recorded it, put that in there. And then there's some videos that Susa has put up that I included in there. Yeah, so any video content from the community or with ourselves included, I'd like to highlight with this channel and kind of popularize out there. But yeah, the meetings end up being pretty good. And, it's sometimes hard to find an hour in the middle of your day, or maybe that's when you're eating lunch, to join it live. It's open in general to the public if you just ask for an invite on the Slack channel. But otherwise, check the video out. There's good discussion, especially around a release like what we're doing right now. There's a lot happening all at once.
There is a lot happening. It's actually really exciting. There has been some help from other provisioning tools that are taking different directions. So people are looking around for, a provisioner, an open source provisioner that also has support from, commercial companies. And so Warewulf is stepping into that position. So it's actually really exciting. So again, thank you for all your work there.
Cool.
Okay, so that's a little bit of the background of what Warewulf is. Did you want to go into a little bit of some of the features and the new stuff happening?
Absolutely. So the new release is coming out hopefully within like a week or so. We're about to put out another release candidate, but it's version 4.6.0, which is roughly analogous to what I would consider a major release for Werewolf. That kind of version 4 is more like a generational leap for the product. So we're in the version 4 generation of Werewolf. But 4.6 will be a relatively large release. And there's a number of things. Actually, I was going to switch over to the terminal, but let's look at the release notes again real quick. So here we go. So the releases are available on the GitHub page already. So you will have found like 4.5.8, which is the last official release. And if you just download the latest release, this is what you'll get still. But if you click through the releases page, you will find this 4.6.0 RC1. So this is our first release candidate. Really big changelog here. We're not going to go into all of these things, but we'll kind of edit this and organize it for the final release. But I encourage people to look through this and see what has changed. And we're trying to highlight people that have contributed to this release. There's quite a number of people that have code in both release candidate 1 and release candidate 2, and in upcoming release candidate 3. So check that out. There are packages here. So if you want to install this, you don't even have to build it. You can just pull the packages down and install it on Rocky 8, Rocky 9, or SUSE. And there's people that are doing this on Ubuntu these days as well. We don't have packages for that yet, but if you're willing to install it from source, there's documentation in the Warewulf docs for doing that. And we're improving our Ubuntu and Debian support all the time. And I'm really grateful for Ian and some other people that have been doing that work in the community. Again, that there's no commercial entity around doing that, but I'm always glad to bring in contributions or to encourage contributions from our user community. But I do have a short list of things that I wanted to highlight as new features that I think people will be pleased to see. So now we'll switch over
Awesome.
to...
So I know that in my mind, as you're going, I have a variety of questions that are coming to my mind. So if you also, as participants and watchers of what Jonathon is sharing, have a question, just put it in the comments and make sure, I think, because, you know, when it's webinar, you have to make it go to us and registrants, I think is the term. You kind of have a couple different options when you submit a question. So we want to hear your questions. Okay, so I'm going to hold off and assume that you're going to answer my questions for a minute before I start asking them.
Okay, well, we'll see. So
Okay.
yeah, this is going to be largely terminal driven. So we'll see that Warewulf is predominantly, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit, but predominantly a command line interface driven system. So what I have here, I have two servers running, and it might be a little confusing, but I'll try to point out. Warewulf Control 2 is the one that's running something very, I think it's what we're about to release as release candidate 3. But then I have this other server, Warewulf Control 1. This is running the current official release. So this is running 4.5.8. And I'll jump back and forth between these to demonstrate some of the differences sometimes. So one of the things that seems like a really small detail but catches people out all the time. So, you know, Warewulf is a system for provisioning what we call node images, what Warewulf 4 has historically called node containers, out to compute nodes. So you can, this is in previous version of Warewulf, you can say like wctl container list, and we can see that in this environment, I have a Rocky 8.9 container, one that I was doing some experiments with SE Linux, a 9 and a 9.4. These are all different images that I can provision my compute nodes with. But our use of the term container here has been a confusion to many people. It was meant to kind of indicate and support the idea of using container ecosystem tools for building these node images. So you can use, frankly, you can use Docker or Podman or Aptainer, any of these to define a node image, which ends up being a really good experience compared to the old way of kind of creating a directory and kind of hacking an image together manually. But this name led people to think that there was some kind of nested virtualization or containerization happening inside of the Warewulf node image that might impact performance. And it just ended up being a surprising bit of nomenclature. So over in Warewulf 4.6.0 land, this has been renamed to image. It behaves exactly the same. We can see long. Oh, I can't type and talk at the same time. There we go. We can see information about the images in our cluster, but just for people whose muscle memory has already switched them to container, that's still present as an alias. But all of the documentation, all of the kind of line help, whether it's on the website or in the command line tool here, will expect to use the term image or node image now instead of container. Again, not really a big functional change, but it was kind of a big deal to go through all of the code and change all of the places that it says container to be image and not break things. But that work is done and has been in place for quite some time now. And I, at least, am glad to have implemented this kind of community responsiveness. We heard a lot of people get caught up by this. Happy to take questions on that, but I don't know if there's a lot of questions there.
Oh yeah, when I saw in the notes changing containers to images, I was like, why? So that was a very detailed explanation of why. It does make sense. There is some confusion about, you know, a container and what that means, and yeah. So thank you for simplifying that. I mean, I guess why image then, but I guess it doesn't. Really.
Image is at least a more historically that name has been used in situations like this for a long time. So in the cloud, you'll do the same thing. You'll have a node image or a cloud instance image that gets put up. So that terminology is a bit more common for this kind of use case. It might seem strange from the outside, but yeah, there's at least precedent for it.
Great, appreciate that.
Yeah, one thing that might be useful to go into here is that Warewulf 4.6.0 comes with some more native support for managing upgrades from previous versions. Than in the past, you kind of had to deploy the image, or sorry, deploy the new version is what I mean to say. and read the release notes, because maybe there would be changes to the configuration files that you needed to go make manually. So an example of that, if I go to my old version and I just look at etc werewolf node.conf. So this is the file that stores all of the information about your nodes and how they should be configured. One example of that might be that this configuration field here says container. And so if you're upgrading to 460, in the past, you would have had to upgrade Warewulf and then come in here and make those changes manually. Warewulf 460 includes a Warewulf upgrade, or Warewulf control upgrade command that can update either, where's my cursor? Here it is. Config updates the warewulf.conf, that's the server configuration file, or nodes, which is that nodes.conf file that I showed earlier. So using this command, we can automatically load a config from another version of Warewulf, and the target here is to support any previous version of Warewulf's config file that you might bring to it, and convert it to a version that is compatible with Warewulf 460 and going forward with whatever the current version of Warewulf that you have is. So to demonstrate this, in this directory, yeah, this is the thing that's going to help a lot of people.
Yes, it is, because I've been hearing that as well. So even 3 dot whatever, or just
sorry, I did misspeak. I mean any previous version of Warewulf 4. So we went back through the whole code history of the Warewulf 4 generation of the system, and we're migrating from that. So thank you for calling that out. No, this is not a 3 to 4 migration tool. But in this directory, I have copies of the warewulf.conf and the nodes.conf from that other environment, from the one that's running 458. And so I can say, we'll start with config. So normally you could just run this and it would upgrade the configuration file in the location that it is on this, like the normal location on the system. Here, I'm specifying an input path because I want to upgrade this specific one that's in this directory, and then an output path because I don't want to overwrite that file. I want to write it out to a new location, just so we can compare what it's going to do. So we get some warnings about things that perhaps we want to care about during an upgrade, or that the system might not have known what to do. So there are some values that are no longer used that maybe never really were used, but were there for future proofing, but we never ended up using. So this versioning scheme inside of the config file, that's been dropped. We no longer log to syslog, so that's been dropped. And then NFS mounts are configured differently now, and we'll go into that a bit later. But this is noticing that we have some NFS exports, some network file system exports, and so it's telling us how to make sure that those get imported properly into the new nodes.conf. So we'll do that also. So here we're running, I've lost my cursor again. We're going to upgrade our nodes.conf. We're going to reference a warewulf.conf that we had previously, so the old version, and we're doing that as recommended by this warning up here in order to import the NFS exports from it. So we had network file system exports in the old config file. That used to implicitly mean that those should be mounted on compute nodes. So now we're going to load that into our nodes.conf during this upgrade. We're going to read this previous config file and write it to this. Again, normally you wouldn't have to do this. We're only doing that to manage these specific files for the demonstration. And then if you run this command without these two options specified, I'll just comment them out for now, you'll be prompted that you must specify them. And you can either do it like I have here, which indicates true, or you could say false to skip that. The reason being, right now in 460, we're in a point where these two changes are relatively large, and you might not necessarily want to apply these in the future or every time you run an upgrade, but we don't know when we're doing this upgrade whether you want this kind of change made to your config. So this is now defaults used to be compiled into Warewulf. They just were there, whether you said them or not. Now we expect all of those default settings to be on a default profile. So this is whether you want to do that during this upgrade. We're going to leave that true. And then we've also made some rather large changes to how overlays are organized. And this is whether we want to replace the previous generic and dub init overlays with their kind of broken out counterparts. And we'll go into that in more detail in a moment. But for now, we will have those both happen because we want them in this example. We get some warnings similar to before. We're not using a Warewulf internal variable to manage the version for this file anymore. And we didn't specify whether our network devices are Ethernet or not. This might be something that we should add to the upgrade process. Maybe it should assume that it's an Ethernet device. But for now, it's just saying, hey, by the way, nothing is telling me what kind of network device this is. You might want to go set it explicitly. So we can see now, here are changes that have been made to our werewolf.conf. So it automatically dropped this syslog value, which doesn't mean anything. This is just a move. This doesn't mean anything. This is similarly meaningless. But then here, it has changed how NFS exports are configured. So it's replaced all of these kind of combined export and mount configurations with just export configurations. So the server side is just for exports now, and the mounts have moved to the client side. And we'll see that when we move over to the nodes.conf. And then here we changed container to image here as well. So that's been updated. Didn't have to do anything except for run the command. Same over here for nodes. So one of the larger changes, like I mentioned, is that instead of just having two main overlays that we package, one for runtime being generic and the other for system being dub init, now those have been broken out into specific overlays for their purpose. So that the main goal here is that it makes it easier to omit parts of the built-in overlays that you don't want to use. So a good example here is that we have historically packed multiple network configuration system overlays together into the system overlay. But if you're only using Network Manager, you don't want ifconfig or Debian interfaces or the SUSE Wicked system. So you can just remove those now from your configuration rather than having to go modify the built-in overlays. Other smaller things that have been changed here, kernel args are now specified as a list instead of a string, just like a one value. That makes it easier to move mix and match kernel arguments from profiles and nodes. And a bunch of other things. Here is where those NFS client mounts are now configured. So lots of detail here that people running 4.6.0 should read about in the release notes when they're published with the final release. But the main goal here is to demonstrate you don't have to read up on all of that to move to 4.6.0 up front anymore. You can just run a couple of Warewulf upgrade commands and it will update your configuration to a version or to a format that's compatible with the new version that you're deploying. And we intend to keep that up to date as we release new versions over time.
Awesome. I think maybe now's the time we got a couple of questions. Is
Excellent.
that okay? Good. Okay. Yes, yeah. Jess, definitely bring up the question. Okay. Hello, Tobias. Will that upgrade tool also handle the changes in distribution overlay layout? For example, the separation of the default WW init overlay into smaller overlays for individual components?
Yeah, so that's precisely what this replace overlays flag is doing. This replace overlays flag is seeing okay, you are including that dub init. Because that flag is active, we're going to assume that means the previous dub init one that was all the overlays packed together. So we're going to explode it out into its component parts. And same for the generic one. It doesn't know anything about the distributions like in the image itself, but it is meant to make it easier then to specify your configuration for a given distribution by including only the parts of the overlays that you want.
Great question. Oh, hi, Sumit. Okay, the question here is, does this mean that to upgrade from 4.5.6 to 4.6.1, I first need to install version 4.6 and then run the upgrade command with the configuration file?
So that's correct. If you have a configuration from 456, then you run this command to update the configuration. So I imagine the question is because people might expect that the upgrade command would upgrade Werewolf itself and not just the configuration. That might be, look, yeah, this it might be worth considering before we put out the final release, renaming this command to like update comp or upgrade comp or something like that to avoid that confusion. Because I could see that this does not upgrade Werewolf the program. In order to get access to this, you need to install 460 or some future version, and then run this command to update your configuration if necessary. In fact, I'm going to take a note about that because I think that's a good idea.
And then so 4.6.0 is going to be the first one that you can use this upgrade command with.
Yeah, in theory, people could do it now. They can install the release candidate and it's there and working as you can see right now. But the first actual like official release that has that command in it will be 460.
So as time goes by, is it going to be that it always goes to the newest latest, or are you going to be able to specify which version you want to upgrade to? Like say they're on 4.6.0 for a while, a year, and they only want to go to 4.6.1.
Yeah, so at that point, they just install the 461 package, and the version of the upgrade command that comes with that package would update to the version that they're running. So it'll always try to munge into the version of Werewolf that is installed, but it won't be able to downgrade. If you were running 470 in some future and wanted to backport to 460, the 470 or the 460 upgrade command won't know how to import necessarily the config from 470. So it's one direction, it goes up only.
Okay, that makes sense. But if you did want to go backwards, you would just then install the lower one and do an update to there.
Well, you'd probably need to do the updates manually at that point because the 460 version of the upgrade command wouldn't know how to read a 470 config file.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for all that clarification. Those are good,
no problem.
Questions.
More questions or on to the next thing? What do we think? Here's another one.
Oh, hey, Ian.
Yeah. So I was, yes, the question here, whether running the upgrade command should just be done automatically when you install the package. It's possible, but especially like right now, because we have these flags like add defaults and replace overlays that we explicitly are wanting the user to specify what they want in so doing. I wouldn't want to do it yet, I think. I was thinking of that as I was saying it and as I was responding to the person previously asking if you'd have to run the commands manually. But I would find it hard to advocate for at this point just because there's just enough like manual like decision making required in running that command, and people might not want their config file to just be upgraded. Though maybe what we could do is run an upgrade but then write the file to a new location. Rather than actually replacing the one and then just telling people, hey, if you want to use the new config file, just move these in place. I don't know. But that's not that much more than running the command in the first place.
Yeah. Well, this really highlights your responsiveness to the community and wanting to make sure that the product is something that people are needing and wanting and are as, simplified as possible for them. So if any of you guys have any interest in getting involved with the community or have some suggestions onto kind of the questions that Jonathon is kind of speaking out loud as he's thinking more about how to, continue to improve Warewulf. The community is a great place to be. So maybe Jess, if you wouldn't mind just putting the community, the Warewulf community Slack link in the chat below, because that's a great place to, get involved and ask questions and let your, concerns be heard.
Yeah, the Werewolf community is kind of a perfect sweet spot of an open source community to get involved in. If you're anything like a Werewolf user, the code is reasonably approachable. I hadn't done any Golang before I got involved in Werewolf, or barely any, and it's been an easy project to get involved with. And we do everything we can to prioritize responsiveness to our user community. So come join the Slack, talk about things, submit some pull requests. We'd love to have you.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, this next feature is something that I personally was terrified of, but a member of our community was really interested in it, and we started throwing some proof of concept code back and forth for it, and here it is in 4.6.0, and that is nested profiles. So I'm going to look at the actual nodes.conf real quick. This is a bit of a contrived example that I set up just to demonstrate what's going on here. So Werewolf has nodes. These represent physical servers in your cluster. But then it also has profiles, and profiles have all the same attributes, or almost all the same attributes as nodes, but you can load a profile's values into a node, and this gives you some grouping and inheritance and reusability in the code. So pretty normally, you'll come with a default profile, and I think, yeah, we can see that default profile right here. That's what's giving us these previously compiled in default values and, a comment just to be there and what the overlays should be for our cluster. But you can include more than one profile. And here I have one just called cluster because I didn't have a different name. And that cluster overlay is defined here. But the new behavior that is new in 4.6.0 is, you can see here, this cluster profile itself has profiles, which didn't used to be possible. So now I have an NFS profile, which has my NFS, my file system mount configuration in it, and a network profile that is just kind of setting a dummy value for a default network device, but you can imagine other network values being here. And so now you can break down your configuration not only across multiple profiles, but with one profile referencing others, and then build up more complex configurations through this kind of nested hierarchy of profiles. So we can see what that looks like right here. So in this output, this isn't, I'll get a pager here. In this output, we have our node here, and then the field that we're configuring, and this is the profile that it's coming from. And so we can see some of these values are coming from default. Some of them, one of them anyway, the image name itself is specified directly in that cluster profile. But some of our values, like this NFS configuration for FS tab, is coming from that NFS profile, even though the node is not directly including this profile. Same for this default net mask is coming from our network profile, even though our node is not including that profile directly. So again, this frightened me a little bit to get in the code, but we've got a lot of tests around it. It seems to be working well, and eager to get this in people's hands and see what they make use of it. The one person in particular in the community, he's excited to kind of rebuild his environment around this functionality once it's released, and I'm eager to see what people do with it.
So I imagine there's lots of different things that you can do with it, but what is he wanting to do with it? What's the value to him? Does this allow you to have, like, manage multiple clusters doing different things from the same place?
So you could imagine, like, if you have, it's more just like clarity in your configuration. If you have, like what I've done here, I imagine he'll want to do something like this, where he'll have one profile that specifies, I want to have these file systems mounted, and then another one that says that maybe multiple profiles that are for different networks. So I have one that's on the network in this building, or one that's on the network in this building, or this high performance network, or that high performance network. Make one profile for each of them. And in the past, if you then wanted to configure your nodes, each node needed to say, okay, I have this network and I have this, I have these file systems mounted, and it had to reference all of those profiles. You could do that before, but then that node would have like this ever increasingly long list of profiles for the different bits of configuration that it had. Now you can group those together and say, okay, all of these sub profiles are part of cluster A. And so I
Mhm.
can make a profile that is cluster A, and cluster A has all these other profiles that go with it. This other cluster, cluster B, has a different set of profiles, and cluster C has another set of profiles. And then you configure those profiles once, and now all you have to do to add a node to that cluster is assign it to that one profile, instead of
Mm.
have to manage that list of profiles for each node that needs to access those things. That's the idea. But it kind of presupposes a relatively heterogeneous and complex environment that you're doing with one Warewulf cluster. Maybe more typical would be to have a Warewulf cluster for each environment, and then this wouldn't be as useful. But some people are very far down the Warewulf rabbit hole and have one big master Warewulf environment that does all of their infrastructure. And we wanted to support that. So here it is.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Oh my. Any questions there, or moving on to the next thing?
I don't see any, so
Okay.
we will carry on. If you do have questions, put them in the chat and we'll get to them.
So the next one solves a pretty big group of trouble that people have been having, similar to what's been going on with node image versus container. But this one is a bit more of a functional change. So when you boot a node, not just with Warewulf, but any node in any environment like this, you need an image. You need something that all your software is in, that your kind of basic commands, not necessarily the end user software that might come from containers or that might come from a file system that you mount in, but the programs of the operating system itself. You need an image for that. And then you also need a kernel that usually goes with that. When you just install Linux on a server, you'll get an operating system image and a kernel all together. But when you're doing this over the network, you have to care about where your kernel is, because it's not just on your hard drive. It's not just on your server. It has to come from somewhere.
Mhm.
And so one of the big innovations in Warewulf 4 is that instead of just having to manage those kernels separately, you can get that kernel directly out of your image. And so when the Warewulf server boots, it says, okay, you have this image, but you need a kernel. Oh, I'll look in that image and I'll see if there's a kernel there. And if there is one, then it serves that out. Because that's a relatively recent innovation, I think it's even beyond like the first release of Warewulf 4. I think that first came about in Warewulf 4.2 or 4.3.
Okay.
Warewulf 4 has also had support for the first way of doing it, where instead of loading the kernel from your image, you would give Warewulf an explicit kernel and then hand that kernel out to nodes when it booted. But it had to be compatible with the image, and there was a lot of effort in making sure that it was a kernel that worked with the image and that it was that it was upgraded at the same time. But over time, that automatic detection got better and better and better. And the fact that you could import kernels directly into Warewulf just ended up being a confusion for people. Every time someone would just go down the quick start and they'd reach the point where it said, and now you can import a kernel, that is where people would break. And we would just have to tell them, skip that part and it will just work. And then they would have a great time. So the first part of this is that whole kernel import process completely gone, removed from the docs, removed from the code. There are ways to do the same thing, but it's all part of the auto detection path now. But what we couldn't do before with auto detection is if your image had multiple kernels in it, you couldn't explicitly say which kernel to boot. And now you can. So the way that works, and finally I can put some stuff on the screen for this, we now see kernels as a sub-function of images. So you can list the kernels that are available in an image with this kernels command under image. So you say Warewulf control image kernels, and now you can see not only the images that have kernels in them, but you can see when an image has multiple kernels that, so like this Rocky Linux 9 image has a 427.37.1 kernel, and then it was later upgraded and now also has a 427.40.1 kernel. In the past, we would have told people, well, go and remove the old one from your image to make sure that Warewulf boots the new one. But now we can see in this list which one Warewulf is detecting. It says that this one here is the default kernel for this image. We see that one of our nodes is booting it. But if we specify to a node that we want to boot either this kernel, we can give it by a path, or this kernel, we can give it by a version, then it will boot that older kernel from this image explicitly. So I could say, for example, ctl node set www node 1, which is the name of my node, and then kernel version is this parameter. It knows that this node has the Rocky Linux 9 image set. So when I tab complete here, it's only going to show me kernel versions for the image that's already loaded. If I didn't have an image set, then it would, I forget if it doesn't show you any or if it shows you for all of them. But in any case, if you have an image set, it does the right thing. And so we can either specify it by a version number, or we can specify it by a path if we want to get really specific. Maybe you have a debug kernel of the same version, so you need to specify the explicit path to it. So this is what allowed us to remove the functionality of importing explicit kernels into Warewulf, which just ended up being a bunch of confusion for people, because now you have all of the same flexibility of loading a specific kernel during boot for a specific node, but it's all baked into the kernel auto detection features inside of Warewulf, and ends up being, again, a really good situation, and just works for the common case and lets you be precise when you need to make an exception.
This is awesome. Is this something that you would then manage inside the profile?
So yeah, you can absolutely do this in the profile, or you can set it in the node, either way. So normally you will just leave it and it will detect the newest one. And so one of the things we did here was brought in some third-party code that is allowing us to detect which of these version numbers is the highest version number. But if you are setting it explicitly, most of the time you would set it in the profile, like you said, the same one that says what image to use, maybe. But then if you want to try a newer kernel on a single node, let's say, you can set that value specifically on a node, reboot that node, and it will use a different kernel from the image before you roll it out to the rest of your nodes.
Wow, that's got to be very helpful.
Yes.
For a lot of people.
We were very excited to get this in.
Yes. Yeah. So I see here that there's like a lot more things that we can talk about. Do we want to keep going, or do we want to like leave a little suspense and maybe do another one when 4.6 comes out?
I will leave that to you. Maybe I'll talk about overlays.
Okay, perfect.
So one of the other big things in Warewulf 4.6 is so in the past, like I said, there were just kind of two big overlays. There was the generic one that was the runtime overlay, and Warewulf init, www init, that was the system overlay. And system and runtime overlays have different kind of behaviors. They're the same thing, but they behave differently when they're applied to nodes in different ways. But all of those overlays were in one place. They would be in var lib Warewulf overlays. But as you can see here now, I only have one. And that's because we've split overlays between the ones that come with Warewulf, which are now in user share Warewulf overlays. And this is where what used to be generic and used to be Warewulf init, all of those have been split out here. And site-defined local overlays are in the previous location. So the big win here is people would have issues where they would modify an overlay or have an overlay of the same name as one that we were providing. And then when they would upgrade Warewulf, they would lose their changes. They'd have to back it up and then restore it later. Separating this lets us prevent that. And it also lets us, in the future, the goal is to create more overlays and kind of maybe not pack them in with Warewulf, but provide them as part of the project for more things that you might want to configure with Warewulf without having to write the overlays yourself. And so in the future, the intent is to have a repository where you can get additional overlays as different packages. And when you install them, they'll go here. And then if you do modify them, as you can see here with issue started life as a packed in overlay, right here. But if you edit an overlay with Warewulf, the first thing it does is copy it to the site location and then makes the change there. And so any modified overlay that you have takes precedence. So if I say Warewulf control overlay list, we can see here all the overlays that Warewulf knows about, what is in the overlay, and then whether it's getting it from the site version of it or the distribution version of it. So here, the only one that I have in my site overlay section is issue, which is coming true here. And then we've made other improvements to overlays as well. The big one is that so there's a set of functions that are meant to be used with templates. So overlays, one of the biggest things about them is that you can define programmatic templates for how to generate configuration files on your system at runtime. There are a bunch of functions that make that easier from a project called Sprig, S-P-R-I-G. And we're now including that in the template environment when you build an overlay. So it makes our overlays better because now we have access to all these functions that make the overlays clearer and more feature rich. But it also makes it easier for sites to define more complex, more feature rich overlays in their environment too, which is going to support this kind of additional growing library of overlays that we're going to start providing alongside Warewulf.
Cool. Is there going to be a way to like template and share an overlay from one site to the next?
Yes. So Warewulf templates, or sorry, Warewulf overlays already have templates. So what we have been increasingly encouraging people to do is, so go to our nodes thing here. So Warewulf nodes and profiles, and nodes inheriting from profiles, as well as network devices and a few other things, can have tags on them. And so the overlays can see these tags and then behave differently depending on how you've tagged the data in your node registry here. So that's already what we're recommending people do. And more functionality that we bake in, even in the distribution overlays, are being activated by tags. So we added the ability to configure DNS with our network overlays, but rather than having kind of special case support for that in Warewulf, you just define tags on your nodes that tell it what DNS servers to use. But for even more complex things, we recently introduced what we call resources. And so all of the NFS client stuff has been moved to resources. These are a name to arbitrary data. It can be a list, it can be a single value, it can be what's called a dictionary or a hash where we have this value equals something. So this, if you know how to read YAML syntax, this is FS tab here is a list of 2 items, and one of the items is a thing that has a file and a mount ops and a spec and a VSFS type, and then a second item that has the same values. But then we just, let's see, overlay show. So in our FS tab overlay, we're just reading that resource, right? It's hard to read this kind of on the spot here, but here we go. We're looking over all of the entries in that FS tab list that we got from our resources, and then we generate mounts for that. So there's nothing special in this. Like anyone could have written this template now that resources exist and share this out with the community, and they don't have to make any changes to Warewulf. They can just make this overlay, share it out, and all you have to do to activate it is configure some resources on your node or configure some tags to do DNS or whatever people want to do. So we're really excited about the addition of resources and the growing acceptance of tags as configuration parameters for overlays, that will encourage both us and other members of the community to publish and share overlays to configure whatever they want their cluster to do. It's going to be great.
Oh man, so great. I can just think in my mind right now how many of our customers and people I know using Warewulf, I'll be like, okay, it's time to upgrade. Let's go. Let's do it.
Yeah.
We've got things to share. That's great. I feel like we could go on and on. I know that we have a question from the field. So let's put the question up real quick before we close out. Hello, Sumit again. Does version 4.6 still only support stateless diskless nodes, or does it now also support stateful nodes? Good question. Going right into the overlay share question.
We have been increasingly supporting disk full nodes, but that's different than stateful provisioning on them. So I think at version 4.5.6 or something like that, certainly in 4.5.8, there's support with Ignition, which is a kind of disk partitioning automation system for creating partitions and file systems and mounts for those on nodes as they boot up. That's still a tech preview, but it's there, and there are definitely people using it. What we don't currently support is writing the OS image onto a disk that has been provisioned in that way. So the OS image is still in memory, and you can provision disk and mount it in many ways. But the operating system itself is still stateless, in memory, not written to disk. That is something that we are pursuing. In fact, I think there's a pull request currently tagged for 4.6.1, though I don't know whether it will make it in 4.6.1. That's just kind of where things that aren't 4.6.0 have gone. That is targeting doing that as part of the. If you've been following some developments in the two-phase boot process for Warewulf, the current plan, the current kind of tact for that is to do that write of the image during the Dracket stage. So when we have our kind of first stage intermediate image running, then that thing would pull the image from the Warewulf server and write it to disk rather than to memory. But we're still working that out and finding the best way to do that has the fewest caveats and exceptions for people. So we do expect that to happen eventually, but it's not there in 4.6.0.
Awesome. Those are some really great questions. Jonathon, my goodness, thank you so much for your time. I think that we definitely are going to need to do this again in a couple of weeks.
I think before we go, though, we did promise a sneak peek, and I probably shouldn't tease that and then not do anything. So this won't be in 4.6.0, but something that we CIQ intend to contribute to the project, hopefully for merging shortly after 4.6.0. Is a REST API for Warewulf that we need for other work that we're doing. But I just wanted to put that up here. This is a little bit out of date. This has not been rebased to the current work that's in 4.6.0 today. So you'll notice, like, for example, it still says container here instead of image. So this is running in a slightly older build before some of the changes that have come in more recently. But this here is just a REST API with kind of an automatically generated web interface for it that you could, like the example that I did before, is you could run a curl against this to get the nodes that are in your cluster. Oh, I need a password. There we go. So here it shows that, it simulated running this curl against our API endpoint, and we got some JSON back out of the list of nodes and well, not the profiles, but the list of nodes and their attributes. And we're filling this out. We've got nodes, we've got containers, what will become images up there. And then overlays and profiles are kind of the four main entities that we're focusing on in this API so far. It's relatively complete within that scope. You can do things like build overlays. You can't edit overlays today, but you can add and remove things from overlays and update nodes. We're excited to get this out into the community and then build additional functionality on top of it. But since we kind of teased this in the description of the webinar, wanted to make sure we didn't leave without at least showing that it is a thing that exists.
That is awesome. I was going to mention it, but I didn't realize that we were able to show it. So it's
just
beautiful.
This far. There are other things that I would love to be able to show, but they're not ready yet.
Yeah. Okay, well, more on the horizon, which is really exciting. I mean, that's what you want from any good open source project is more, and to be responsive. So again, make sure that you join the community on Slack. There is an older one where Warewulf used to be not that long ago. So sometimes people are a little bit confused. So we'll make sure to put the most current Warewulf Slack channel link there in the comments for you. We also have the YouTube channel. We would love for you guys to be a part of it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to ciq.com. We offer training for Warewulf, which is really wonderful. You can kind of like sit down one-on-one and go through, everything about it. We also offer support, and as well as kind of building out your cluster for you, helping you really envision and think about what it is that you want to do and how you want to set it up and help you set it up. So lots of options for you. And then of course on the horizon is that beautiful, we're calling it REST API. Okay. So GUI's out. No more GUI talk, huh?
No. So what you saw was not the GUI. The REST is it's a technical term, but it's a type of API. So yeah, the goal is to provide a web interface atop that, but the REST API is a requisite for building a web interface on top of it.
Okay. Well, thank you for that clarification. Now I get it. All right. Well, lots on the horizon, Jonathon. Again, thank you so much, and the Warewulf community and everyone involved and all of the users. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you have a wonderful day. And we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Thanks all.